Diddy sat motionless at the defense table, the collar of his suit pressed and perfect, but his face oddly hollow. The courtroom wasn't buzzing like the mornings before it was holding its breath. Something had shifted. Outside, cameras lined the courthouse steps. Inside, the air felt bruised. The judge entered with a deliberate pace, his eyes scanning the room not just for order, but for readiness. No one moved. No one whispered. Not even the reporters typing beneath the tables. The bailiff called the court to order, but it was unnecessary. Everyone was already suspended in the moment. The prosecutor rose, silent at first, almost reverent, and then, with a calm that cut sharper than any raised voice, he spoke. "Your Honor, the prosecution moves to admit into evidence private security footage dated March 28, 2016. The footage was anonymously submitted and verified by forensic teams as authentic. It originates from the internal security system of SC Enterprises, and the courtroom didn't erupt. It inhaled. SC Enterprises, JZ. It hung in the air like a grenade's pin, pulled but not yet thrown. The judge adjusted his glasses, peering down at the flash drive handed to the clerk. Is this footage authenticated through the proper digital forensic chain? The prosecutor nodded. It is. It has not been altered. Metadata aligns with logs from the time period and matches the blueprint of Mr. Combs's estate in Manhattan. The defense team surged to their feet. Objections flared. Unauthorized surveillance, privacy invasion, hearsay. But the judge simply said, "If it is authentic and relevant, the jury will see it." That was it. No turning back. The lights dimmed. The projector flickered, and the first frames of grainy black and white footage bathed the courtroom in truth. A party, a grand entrance foyer. Guests arrived in waves, women in shimmering gowns, men in tailored suits. Face blurred, A-list protected, but the energy unmistakable. At 23 minutes into the footage, the camera panned ever so slightly above the base of a grand staircase. Two men stood there. One, unmistakably Diddy, the other, partially obscured. They gestured. Diddy raised a hand. A young woman approached. She couldn't have been older than 20. He leaned in, whispered. Then another man appeared and led her up the stairs. No music, no drama, just movements. Cold, coordinated. 17 minutes later, the same woman descended. Alone, her face pale, makeup streaked. She wobbled slightly, pausing at the last step, eyes scanning, searching. She walked out of frame, unsteady. That was the last she appeared, but she wasn't the only one. The footage revealed 3 other women, all at different intervals, led upstairs in similar fashion. Diddy each time was nearby, speaking to someone, pointing, moving. The screen went dark, then silent. The judge didn't speak. The jury didn't blink. It was as if everyone in that room had forgotten to breathe. Then a voice, soft, firm. "We call Kayla Foster to the stand." A woman in her early 30s walked in, visibly shaken but trying to stand tall. She was sworn in. "My name is Kayla Foster. I worked for Mr. Combs as an event assistant from late 2015 to early 2017. The prosecutor approached gently. "Did you watch the footage just now?" Kayla nodded. "Yes. Do you recognize the individuals involved?" "I do. I remember that night." Her voice cracked slightly, but her gaze toward the jury steadied. "I saw the girls being taken upstairs. I wasn't allowed beyond the first floor. We were instructed to keep guests distracted if they asked to leave early." The courtroom leaned forward. Distracted how? With drinks, with hugs, with reassurances. If they cried, we offered tissues. If they were upset, we told them their friend was waiting. We weren't allowed to call rides unless we had clearance. Clearance from whom? Security. But the orders came from Sean. Diddy didn't flinch. And the woman in the video who came back down the stairs? Kayla looked down. She asked for her phone. She said she wanted to leave. I tried to help. My supervisor pulled me aside and said, "Stay out of it, or you're next." The defense erupted. Hearsay, threat, speculation. The judge didn't respond at first. He looked at Kayla. And in that moment, the courtroom didn't feel like a courtroom. It felt like a reckoning. Objection overruled. Did you ever witness Mr. Commies giving an order regarding a guest? Kayla swallowed. Yes. One time a girl screamed she wanted to leave. He looked at security and said, "Fix that." Did he yell? No, he didn't have to. The jury sat like statues. "Why are you speaking now, Miss Foster?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I watched that footage and I realized the cameras saw what I couldn't say." The room went still again, not the kind of stillness born of confusion, the kind that follows understanding. The prosecutor rested. The defense didn't cross-examine, they didn't dare. The judge recessed. The room didn't move. Even as the bailiff repeated the announcement, people stayed, their minds trapped in the flicker of surveillance footage and the quiet horror of Kayla's voice. Outside, the world still didn't know, but it would, because the truth had been recorded, and now it had been played. When court resumed after recess, the room didn't regain its normal rhythm. It was as if time itself had been paused, rewound, and then carefully played forward with every sound amplified and every movement loaded with meaning. Diddy sat exactly as he had before, shoulders squared, hands flat on the table, but something in his posture had cracked. His stillness was no longer composed, it was braced. Across the courtroom, the prosecutor stood again, this time not with footage in hand, but with something heavier silence. He let it linger just long enough for the jury's nerves to stretch taut, and then he said, "Your Honor, the prosecution moves to present a 26-second audio recording obtained via an anonymous submission, recently verified to correspond directly with the footage previously admitted." No one moved. Audio was different. Footage could be denied, explained, blurred. But voices, tone, inflection, fear they pierced. The judge allowed it. The lights dimmed, but there was no screen, only sound. It started innocuously. Music in the background, glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off marble walls. Then a shift. A muffled female voice, anxious. "I don't know where she went." A male voice, too calm. "She's fine. Stay here." Then, quieter, closer to the recording device, a whisper. "Don't go up there. Don't. Just trust me." It ended. Just like that. The room didn't speak. It didn't need to. The fear in that final whisper lingered like smoke. A few jurors turned to each other, their faces pale. The defense didn't object. Not because they agreed, but because they had no ammunition left. Then something unexpected happened. Kayla Foster, the event assistant from earlier, stood again. She hadn't been recalled. She asked to speak. The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." Kayla stepped to the center of the courtroom. Her voice was steadier now. "The voice at the end of that recording, the one that said, 'Don't go up there,' that was me." A gasp moved through the gallery, but not like in movies. It was human, collective, full of sick recognition. "I didn't have proof back then," Kayla said, "just instincts. But that night, I saw too much. One of the girls, the one crying in the footage, she was later found outside, no shoes, no phone. I tried to help her. She looked at me and said, 'I should have listened to you.' Her voice broke. I reported it. 3 days later, I was reassigned. No guest access, no floor work, basement inventory, and then my contract was terminated." She looked around the room, her gaze landing on the jury and then on Diddy. "I've carried that moment for 7 years." The judge let her finish. No interruption, no time limit. The courtroom had become more than a courtroom. It had become a confessional. As Kayla returned to her seat, the prosecutor stepped forward again, not with a flourish, but with a transcript. "Your Honor, this is a verified text message exchange between Mr. Commies and a third-party contractor, timestamped the morning after the event." The judge nodded. The messages were read aloud. Diddy: "Everything quiet?" Contractor: "Handled. No phones, no press." Diddy: "Good. Keep it that way." That was all. 3 lines. But they detonated in the courtroom like dynamite. The defense rose half-heartedly with objections, context, relevance, but their voices were lost under the weight of the room's reaction. One juror wiped a tear. Another's leg bounced uncontrollably. In the media gallery, pens scratched at notepads so furiously it sounded like rain. Diddy sat with his eyes on the table. His hands clenched, not clasped. His suit perfect, but his composure unraveling. For days he had remained silent, letting lawyers speak for him, letting posture and presence do the work. But now, silence was no longer power. It was evidence. The courtroom recessed again, but no one exhaled. Not really. Even outside, the air felt heavier, cameras blinking like lightning, protesters growing in number, placards now bearing a face hers. The girl from the footage, still unnamed, still unheard, but now unforgettable. The prosecution wasn't done. They returned with a final thread, quieter, smaller, but sharp enough to sever what little defense remained. A former security consultant entered Michelle Rivers. Calm, composed, her voice like a scalpel. "I work at third-party events hosted by Mr. Commies. My role was tech oversight, camera systems, room logs." She explained that the camera which caught the upstairs hallway footage the world had just seen wasn't part of Diddy's main system. It was a hidden auxiliary feed, installed by someone concerned for their personal safety. "Who?" the prosecutor asked. She hesitated, then said it plainly. "Jay-Z." The name didn't echo. It dropped like iron. "He didn't tell anyone, just his bodyguard and one technician. I was that technician." The jury froze. "I was told to store the footage off the grid, encrypted, only accessible by 3 profiles: Jay-Z, his security chief, and 1 alias." "Which alias?" "A profile linked to Mr. Commies." Audible disbelief rippled through the gallery. "So you're saying he knew about the camera?" "Yes. He accessed the footage 2 days after the party." The jurors began scribbling again. Lines, arrows, dates. One shook their head, stunned. "Did he ever attempt to delete it?" "Yes, 2 weeks later. The deletion failed. Corrupted transfer. That's why the file still exists." That sentence hung in the air like smoke from a fire just extinguished. The judge recessed again. Diddy didn't move. He hadn't looked up in hours, but his knuckles were white, his leg was twitching, and in the silence that followed, a whisper circled the courtroom like wind through a broken window. He saw it all. And worse, he let it happen. The courtroom doors opened the next morning to a crowd that had doubled overnight. Not just press and legal observers now, but protesters, survivors of other scandals, former fans clutching signs, and ordinary citizens who had followed every headline, every leak, every blurry screenshot of a courtroom sketch. The atmosphere had shifted. No longer morbid curiosity, this was collective anticipation. Inside, the courtroom felt different, not louder, heavier, the kind of heavy that sinks into skin and stays there. Even the air conditioning couldn't cut through it. The jury filed in with straight backs and tight jaws. No longer just listening, they were bearing witness. The judge entered last, stern and subdued, his robe crisp but his face unreadable. Diddy was already seated, same tailored suit, same perfect grooming. But today, his hands fidgeted. A small tell, but loud to those who had watched him sit in stony silence for days. The prosecution rose again, and this time they didn't bring another flash drive or transcript. They brought a woman, late 20s, smartly dressed, calm. But her eyes told a story no document could. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "this is Ms. Isla Anderson, internal data technician at SE Enterprises." She took the stand, placed her hand on the Bible, and when she swore to tell the truth, her voice didn't waver. "I managed biometric access logs and internal storage protocols for enterprise-grade surveillance between 2015 and 2018, she began. The jury sat straighter. This wasn't emotional testimony. This was technical truth. Cold, undeniable. The footage submitted to the court last week originated from a hidden directory only accessible by 3 parties: Jay-Z, his chief of security, and one profile associated with Mr. Combs. "How do you confirm the profile's connection?" the prosecutor asked. "Fingerprint match, username pattern, and access timestamp logs." He opened the video file at 2:14 a.m., 2 days after the party. And what happened after? An attempt to wipe the archive. It failed. The deletion was flagged as corrupted. That's why the footage still exists. A murmur rustled through the gallery. The jurors exchanged looks. This wasn't speculation. This was code and keystrokes and cold numbers that told a story more damning than any memory ever could. "Was the camera pitched for guest protection?" the prosecutor asked. "Publicly, yes, but access protocols suggest otherwise. The camera was meant for leverage, a control mechanism, eyes in the dark." "Who had the final copy?" Isla hesitated, then said clearly, "Mr. Calmes." The only confirmed download came from a device linked to his encrypted BlackBerry, now in federal custody. That sentence alone felt like a bomb detonating without noise. The defense didn't rise. They didn't object. They sat frozen. The prosecution returned to their table. Quiet, precise, lethal. Outside, the storm was growing. Inside, the walls were closing in. But the day wasn't done. A quiet buzz passed through the courtroom as another witness entered, not young, not flashy. A man in his 40s, plain suit, no press photos ever found of him before. He was introduced as Ethan Price, former estate operations manager for Diddy. "I ran logistics," he said. "Staff coordination, camera settings, guest protocols. If something moved, I scheduled it." "Were you aware of any orders regarding camera control during events?" "Yes. Always deactivate hallway cameras. No exceptions." Why? Privacy, but also control. He didn't want guests recording, and he didn't want to be recorded. Did he ever speak to you directly about a guest incident? Ethan's voice softened, not from fear, but fatigue. Yes, a girl ran out crying one night. He didn't ask what happened. He just looked at me and said, "Make sure no one remembers that face." The courtroom went still again, the kind of stillness that makes your ears ring. And what did you do? I erased the guest log, removed her name, scrubbed camera metadata. It's why she was never identified publicly. Why are you testifying now? Ethan looked up, finally facing the jury. Because I can't keep pretending it was just logistics. It wasn't a party. It was a pattern. Those words, those 5 syllables stuck in the courtroom like blades. It wasn't a party. It was a pattern. The prosecution didn't embellish. They let it sit. The judge recessed briefly. No one left their seat. They just stared at the spot where Ethan had spoken, like truth had just been carved into the floor. When court resumed, the prosecution returned not with footage this time, but a memo corporate, dry, almost boring, recovered from a seized laptop. Event debrief, guest exposure neutralized, suite cleared, security rerouted, Jay's concern addressed, K no longer a threat. What does this mean? The prosecutor asked a digital forensics expert. It means this wasn't a cleanup, it was standard procedure. The jury didn't gasp this time. They just stared down at their notebooks, scribbling furiously, connecting dots. And then, like a final lock clicking open, the prosecution rested for the day. No dramatic flourish, no final jab, just a quiet retreat, leaving behind the echo of what the witnesses, the footage, the data, and now the structure itself had revealed. Diddy didn't look up, not at his lawyers, not at the judge, not even when the court was dismissed. He sat there, in a seat no longer of defense, but of exposure. And outside, the world was no longer asking questions. It was waiting for confirmation. The verdict hadn't been spoken, but the truth had. And in that courtroom, it had nowhere left to hide. The final day of testimony arrived without announcement, like a slow and inevitable tide. No media alert, no grand reveal. But everyone felt it. The crowd outside had tripled. Survivors of past scandals stood shoulder to shoulder with reporters, activists, onlookers, and former fans whose faces held disappointment deeper than anger. Inside, the courthouse was so quiet that even the hum of fluorescent lights felt intrusive. The jury filed in solemnly, their eyes shadowed by sleeplessness and burden. No longer passive observers, they moved like people who knew they were carrying more than a verdict, they were carrying history. Diddy entered last. For the first time, he didn't command the room. He didn't meet anyone's gaze. His suit was still perfect, but it hung on him differently. His spine was straighter than ever, but the tension in his jaw betrayed a storm within. He was no longer the mogul, no longer the man behind the myth. He was the story now, and not the kind he used to produce. The prosecution did not call another witness. They didn't need to. Instead, the lead attorney stood, walked to the evidence table, and began laying out a series of photographs, one by one. Faces, different women, different nights. Same expressions, fear, confusion, vacancy. Some looking directly at the camera as if begging it to be a witness. The final photo was placed with deliberate care. It was the girl from the original footage, unblurred, her face no longer anonymized, human, real. The prosecutor turned to the jury. His voice was not loud. It was gentle, unflinching. We end this case not with new facts, but with the truth you've already seen. He gestured to the photos. These women, some testified, some never spoke. Some may never speak, but they existed. They mattered. Every hallway they walked down, every door they passed through, every moment they were unseen. He didn't pace. He didn't point. He simply continued. This was never about one night. It was never just about Sean Commies. This was about what happens when power forgets that people are not disposable, when silence becomes currency, when entire systems are built to protect the few by erasing the many. He paused, allowing the words to soak into the room like rain into thirsty soil. We are not asking you to believe one person. We're asking you to remember everything you've seen. The footage, the logs, the audio, the voice that said, "Don't go up there," the hands that erased names, the eyes that watched and chose to forget. He picked up the final photo. She walked up those stairs thinking there was music and laughter on the other side. She walked down into a lifetime of silence, and then he said nothing more. He didn't need to. The weight in the room did the rest. The judge turned to the jury to begin instructions for deliberation. But even he paused, letting the stillness hold for one beat longer than protocol required. The defense team remained seated, offering no objection, no last-minute character witness, no statement from the defendant. It would have been futile. There was nothing left to salvage. The courtroom recessed for the final time. Outside, the steps were flooded with people. Signs waved high. Fame isn't innocence. We believe her. No more silence. Cameras clicked, not for spectacle, but for record. And far back, at the edge of the crowd, stood a girl in a hooded sweatshirt. No fanfare, no announcement, just her. The girl from the footage, watching. She had never taken the stand, never spoken a word in court, but the truth had spoken for her, through the whispers, through the tapes, through every frame they tried to erase. And now, as the courtroom doors closed for deliberation, no one doubted what was coming. Not the jury, not the press, not even Diddy. Because when a kingdom built on silence begins to fall, it doesn't crumble, it echoes. Loud enough for the world to hear.